it just seems to me that the same questions being, to my ears, begged yet again. It matters perfectly. There is an objective, categorical reason, not a matter of opinion. There's a fact of the matter about the compelling, overriding reason that you are irrational to disregard, even though, in terms of the heat death of the universe, it won't stop it. But for all that, there's an objective reason not to behave this way.
Yeah, that would be to say you have an objective moral duty. And for the third point, I was willing to grant that. But the question here is the deeper question about why adopt the moral point of view. And that can't be a moral answer because you're asking the question, why adopt the moral point of view? I think the concern that I have in this third point is that on
What's the answer that you believe you get?
Let me explain. I think on the third point that what I'm trying to say there is that on atheism or naturalism, that prudential value and moral value are on a collision course with each other. That what it's prudent for me to do is often in contrast or in conflict with what's moral for me to do. And prudence would seem to trump morality in terms of one's self-interest in virtue of the fact that it makes no difference how you choose. But on theism, where there is moral accountability, you can consistently make choices that go against your self-interest and sacrifice self-interest and prudence for the sake of the moral value and moral duty.
Because precisely you'll get it back in the end, and so it's not really in the long term a self-sacrifice at all. That's the thought, yes?
Well, that wasn't what that wouldn't be the way I'd put it. It's not that...
But that is the reason that you think you can resolve the conflict between prudence and and morality, because God makes it be the case that unless you act morally, your self-interest won't actually be furthered. That's how the solution is.
Yes, that's right. That they'll be in harmony with each other ultimately.
So you're completely right. I don't believe they're in harmony.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I believe the only rational thing to do is to act prudently. On the contrary, I believe there's greater reason. This should be a form of a question, like Jeopardy. Put this in a form of question, shall we?
Yeah.
Why not believe that moral reasons outweigh prudential reasons? The mere fact that there's a conflict doesn't commit the naturalist to the claim that the prudential ones are the weightier ones.
All right, but there is that conflict, and for many people, I think, as I said, this can have a demoralizing effect upon a person because ultimately his moral choices make no difference either for himself or for the good of the universe. And I suspect that this will be demoralizing in the way that Adams suggested it would.
No doubt for some people it will be, but of course for some people there's a different kind of demoralizing that takes place with the belief in theism, isn't there? I mean, if we're just going to talk about what are some possible psychological effects, some people will act morally not out of the recognition of the objective values, but merely in hopes of getting into heaven and avoiding hell. There's something morally off about that as well. And
I agree.
So both sides face certain empirical questions about, certain people may misread the implications of the view. That strikes me as a standoff at best.
I don't know. I'm not sure that the person who acts in self-interest has misread the implications of the atheistic worldview.
That's because you've yet again assumed that if we're naturalists, we must assume that prudence, either there are no moral reasons at all, or if there are, they're inferior in strength to prudential reasons. That doesn't seem to me to follow from naturalism at all. If we had more time, obviously we can only begin to scratch the surface of this debate. If we had more time, I'd lay upon you my elaborate theory of the nature of practical reasoning, according to which prudential reasons are less significant than moral reasons. This is a view that I think is completely compatible with naturalism.
Perhaps we can get into it with some questions.
Okay. So how can we justify the punishment? In terms of the rules of the social contract. What do we do? We agree in the contract that if people break the contract, they'll be subject to penalty.
What if he doesn't want to sign the contract?
So look,
he's outside the contract, so he's not bound by it.
Well, the question is not what does any given person in fact agree to. That's why I talked about what we would agree to insofar as we're imagining ourselves as being perfectly rational. As a perfectly rational being, that is to say, if you imagined a kind of souped up, cleaned up version of the dictator, it would be just as reasonable for him to sign the contract as for the rest of us. It's neither here nor there that he doesn't accept morality. He's still bound by it. We're all bound by it precisely because it would be reasonable for all of us to agree to its terms.
Dr. Kagan, you say that human reason leads to morality.
Dr. Craig.
Dr. Craig, sorry. Wrong pile. Okay, I got myself confused. Okay. Dr. Craig, do you think that without God there is no free will?
Yes, I guess I would say that, because it would seem to me that if God doesn't exist, then human beings are just material objects, and that what we call free choices are just the results of electrochemical reactions in our nervous system, and that therefore they're not genuinely free. So that was why I said one of the implications of naturalism is physicalism, and as a result determinism. And this seems to me to be just a clear reason for thinking that our moral choices are ultimately illusory and insignificant, because they're like having a toothache, or like having hair grow. There is no sense in which a personal agent freely chooses between A and not A and making a moral decision. So I guess I would say that.
Shelley, it seems like there are a lot of people are hung up on the Nazis.
Yeah. They're bad. They're objectively bad. Let's be clear about that.
But it's hard for them to, it seems like, just based on the questions, it's hard for people to understand how we can objectively say they're bad when, if they won, would they still be bad? If they were the ones kind of running the world and dictating morality, would they still be objectively bad in your view?
Yes, the suggestion is not that it's a matter of a popularity poll, or who wins the Second World War, or which way history goes. It's a thought experiment. The social contract is a thought experiment, and you ask yourself, what are reasonable terms to govern our behaviors with one another? And in trying to set up that thought experiment, you want to set certain background conditions. One background condition I mentioned was the veil of ignorance. You want to make sure you don't know whether you're one of the people who are, in fact, the winners in society or the losers in society. One of the conditions is you want to imagine the bargainers are rational, because you don't want the rules that emerge to be an artifact of some mistake in reasoning. It's neither here nor there what the Nazis thought was acceptable. The question is just what, in fact, would be the terms of a contract agreed upon by perfectly rational bargainers. And the terms of those contracts, I think if we had more time, we could proceed to lay out the argument, are such that there'd be a prohibition against killing innocent people, which, of course, is exactly what the Nazis did. So what the Nazis did was violate the terms of the contract. And so, in fact, they were immoral whether or not they see it.
Dr. Craig, there seems to be an issue with this idea of objective good, that there have been numerous crimes in the history of humanity perpetrated on, in the name of religion.
Right.
Right. How do you grapple with that issue?
I'd like to use religious examples of atrocities to help communicate to students the difference between objective good and objective evil. If you say that there is no objective moral value or moral duties, then you have to say things like this, that the Spanish Inquisition, which sent thousands of Jews to their deaths, was really morally indifferent. That the Crusades, which enlisted children to send off to war and then were ultimately sold into slavery, was a morally indifferent act. That religious intolerance is morally fine. So I think that these examples help to underscore the fact that there really are objective moral values and duties that we recognize when we think about these kinds of situations.